you said, God, you said you would scatter them. Verse 9. But if you return to me and obey my commandments, then even if you are exiled, they were away from their home, people from the farthest horizon, I will gather them from there and bring them to the place. In other words, Nehemiah was reminding God what he said in his word. The most powerful prayer that you can pray is get a hold of a promise of God and remind God about his promise. You can stand assured in the power of your prayer when you have the word of God, and Nehemiah reminds God, God, you said if they were disobedient, you would scatter them, but if they would return and come to you, you would bring them back. Number 10, verse 10. They are your servants, your people, whom you redeemed by your great strength and your mighty hand. Again, God, don't forget that the Israelites are your people. God, don't forget that you redeemed them. You saved them with great strength in your mighty hand. What does that say? He did it before, he can do it again. And the last verse, verse 11. Lord, let your ears be attentive to my prayer of this servant and the prayer of your servants who delight in revering your name. Give your servant success today by granting him favor in the presence of this man. Of this man, I was the cupbearer to the king. Nehemiah, when he was taking the task that was before him, he needed favor. He had no influence. He had no power. He had no title. But yet he saw the need and he prayed. And he went before the king. And guess what? The king gave him permission. And the king granted everything that he needed. Number 2, as he goes on, he goes to the king. And we're going to go to Nehemiah 2:4. This really blesses me. As he goes to the king, he had prayed a couple of days. He had fasted in prayer. Now it's time to go to the king. You know, there are times you can pray about something, but then there's time that you have to act. Where God says, Moses, what are you waiting for? Get up and get these people going. And some of us, we like to pray and pray, but that gives us a move not to do nothing. But he went before the king. I love this. He went to the king and said to me, what is it that you want? The king asked him, what is it that you want? Can you imagine that? The king was able to say, what do you want? I pray to the God of heaven. You ever met somebody that's giving you a hard time and you're praying in your mind? Sometimes you deal with people, deal with situations, and you're praying SOS prayers. We got to do that. You pray before, and while you're going through the situation, you confront the person, you talk to the person, while they don't need to know. In your mind, you're praying to the God of heaven. And that's what he said. Then I prayed to the God of heaven. When he asked me what I wanted, I prayed in my mind. I prayed in my heart. I would encourage you to do the same. Hear what you can do. God, help me. Lord, expect results when you put it in God's hands. Number 3, chapter 4. After being taunted. Now, once he actually goes and starts doing the work, and I'm giving you an overview of the whole chapter. We're in chapter 1, then we're in chapter 2, now we're in chapter 4. What was going on? He starts building the wall. And in Nehemiah chapter 4, verse 4 and 5, they start mocking him because of what he was doing. We're going to talk about that not next week, but the following week. So now he's in the midst of doing the prayer. And they start intimidating him, God's people. And Nehemiah begins to pray, hear us, O God, for we are despised. Turn their insults back on their own head. Give them over as plunder in the land of captivity. In other words, Nehemiah prayed That God will help them. Let's go to verse 5, Dennis. And do not cover their guilt or blot out their sins from your sight, for they have thrown insults in the face of the builders. It's so easy not to do anything. Guess what? When you don't do anything, you don't get no critics. But the moment you decide to do something, you better expect there are going to be people who are going to criticize you, and there will be people who will misjudge your intentions. And Nehemiah was experiencing opposition, and what he does, he prays to the God of heaven. Don't put things in your own hand. God says, vengeance is mine, saith the Lord. Don't you try to defend yourself. You just pray about it. No matter what people may say or what they may do, instead of trying to defend yourself, because when you try to defend yourself, you make yourself a fool. But when you say, God, I leave it in your hands, and I'm going to trust you, you deal with this opposition, and you deal with these adversaries. And that's what he did. And then again, in verse 9 of chapter 4, again, after threats of attacks by the enemy, he goes on to say, but we prayed to our God and posted a guard day and night to meet the threat. He prayed day and night. See? We are in your hands. God, keep us. In other words, he was asking God for strength. How many need strength today? It's so easy when you're in the mix of things, when you're trying to do God's will, and you have opposition, hardships, difficulties, and it's so easy to lose your strength. And that's why the Bible said the joy of the Lord is my strength. When you have joy, when God gives you that supernatural fruit of joy, you have strength. Once you lose your joy, you lose strength. Anyone that's depressed or discouraged, you know that they don't have no strength. They're ready to give up. We have to ask the Lord to give us strength even through the process, and that's what Nehemiah did. I'm coming to a close soon. Then we find here, he faced ridicule. They ridiculed him. Then he was attacked after threats of attack by the enemy, and then he responds to the threats. Chapter 6, verse 9. They were all trying to frighten us, thinking their hands will get too weak for the work, and it will not be completed. But I prayed, now strengthen my hands. See? The ultimate goal of the enemy is to discourage you, that you get weak. Have you ever gotten weak? You just want to throw it in. You're tired. But then he prayed, now, God, strengthen my hands. I look to you. And then in chapter 13, he talks in verse 29. Again, this is all through the chapter. Chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 6, 13. Nehemiah is constantly praying. Can I encourage you? Don't give up on your prayers. There are things that I'm praying for that I haven't seen the manifestation of it yet. There are things that I'm praying that sometimes it gets worse before it gets better. But you have to keep on praying and ask the Lord for strength, because, the title of my message is that prayer makes it happen. Prayer makes it happen. That's the title of my message. And so Nehemiah, yes, he did everything that he had to do to be practical. He went before the king. He got supplies. He spoke to people. He worked together. But ultimately, he just kept on praying, And when you pray and work, God will give you the glory and give you the strength. And so in chapter 13, he also asks for prayer. 13:29. Remember then, my God, because they defiled the priestly office and the covenant of the priesthood and of the Levites. So we see that he's praying. Remember them, my God. We need to pray for our lives. We need to pray for ourselves. We need to pray for our family. And we need to pray for our nation and ultimately the world. As I close, I read from chapter 5:19. He begins to say, remember me with favor, my God, for all I have done for these people. God, give me favor. You know, favor comes from God. When I look at my life, just as we've been saved by grace, and God does, but you know that God gives us favor. God gives us favor with people. I don't mean to be boastful, but I have the favor of God in my life. And you have the favor of God. Not because I'm special, not because I deserve it. It's because God is so good. He blesses his children with favor. And there are times I don't tell anybody what I do for a living. Or not what I do, what my calling is. And I tell you, without them even knowing I'm a pastor, without knowing, just God gives me favor. You know, I think I can do this for you. Really? Have you ever experienced that before? Where people just, they gave you favor? You can pray for favor. God, give me favor. Remember with favor, my God, for all that I've done for these people. Give me favor, Lord. With your neighbor, with your boss. God, give me favor. And then verse 13, chapter 13, verse 14. Remember me for this, my God, and do not blot out what I have so faithfully done for the house of my God and its services. And concluding verse 22 of that chapter. 22, verse 20. Then I commanded the Levites to purify themselves and go and guard the gates in order to keep the Sabbath day holy. Remember me for this also, my God, and show me mercy to me according to your great love. In verse 31. We need to pray. And we need to pray in verse 31, Dennis, intentionally, and ask God to help us. And I believe whatever ministry you follow, whatever ministry you're involved in, whatever task that you have, ask God to give you the victory. Ask God to give you the victory when it comes to your children, when it comes to your marriage. I also made provision for the contribution of wood at a designated time, and for the first fruit, remember me with favor. He encouraged the people to give to the Lord. And God gave him favor. The whole book, you see Nehemiah praying, praying, and praying. What's your prayer life like? Doesn't mean you're on your knees 24/7. It means while you're driving, you can be praying. It means when you're walking, you can be praying. When you're taking the subway, you can be praying. While you're doing the dishes, you can be praying. While you're vacuuming, you can do the prayer. Constantly praying. Praying and believing God that he's going to see us through.